The moderator of our next session, Dr. Tony Hooker, flew in here from Australia. I don't know how much dose you got, Tony. You still able to walk? Well, we're getting into risk. This is really what the bottom line of all this. So, Tony, bring your crew up here. Big warm welcome from Tony Hooker, yeah?
Yeah, well, while all my speakers are coming up, I'd just like to thank Ed for reminding me how much radiation I've just received. I've been in Milan, London, Chicago, and now here. I know one thing that is dangerous. My body has no idea what time it is and what day it is. Whilst the speakers are coming up, risk communication, fear and regulations, these are topics really close to my heart. And Cynthia really... so I think laid down an interesting point last night, and certainly when those papers come out about CT risk in children, you can guarantee that the next day, you have to excuse my voice, I am struggling, I get numerous phone calls from concerned parents and about the risk of their children having received CTs. So, you know, it's very important that we do, relay appropriate risks to those people. So no one wants to hear me. So our first speaker is Jacques Lockhart. Most people would know Jacques quite well. He's vice chair of the ICRP, and he's professor at the Nagasaki Atomic Bomb Disease Institute. So, welcome, Jacques.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, dear colleagues. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for their kind invitation to participate to this very interesting meeting. I'm going to speak about some lessons in communication from the Fukushima accident and before from the Chernobyl accident. First, the background of my presentation. I mean, I've been involved in the so-called a series of dialogue meetings on the rehabilitation of living conditions after the Fukushima accident. This was initiated by ICRP in November 2011. We held 19 two-days meetings in different communities of the Fukushima prefecture. And I will not say more because Chris Clement is going to present you in more details these dialogues in his presentation this afternoon. Then my second experience is with the Suetsugi community. The Suetsugi community, this is a small community which is located about 30 kilometers south on the coast, south from the Fukushima power plant. And I have been invited to visit this community by Mrs. Ando in July 2012. And since then, I've been there. I visited the community 13 times, and each time working and dialoguing with the people. So this is the background for my presentation. And of course, the focus here is on the communication with the people living in the affected territories, and in particular after the accident, and mainly after the accident. It's not about communication during the acute phase of the accident, and it's not about communication with the large public living outside the affected areas, which is another issue. So there are pictures here from the dialogue, but you will know more with Chris, as I said before, and a picture about the co-expertise process. You will know more also. Mrs. Ando is going to present the Suetsugi experiences in more details. So what is at stake in the management of a nuclear accident? You know, the eruption of radioactivity into people's everyday lives, and of course its long-term persistence, is creating a very, very complex situation, which profoundly upset daily life of everyone. It raised many, many questions and concerns. I don't speak about fear, but also fear. It generates many different and opposite views, and of course, it exacerbates conflicts. And for us, as radiation protection professionals, what is at stake is to protect the population against radiation risk. But we have also to keep in mind that the objective is to preserve as much as possible decent working conditions on the accident site and decent living conditions for the affected people of site. These objectives, and I will not go in details, but these objectives are part of the overall ethical perspectives shared of all ethical theories by all ethical theories, which is to ensure at the same time the well-being of people, of individuals, and the quality of the living together. This dimension of living together emerged because of the catastrophe. In normal life, we don't care too much about the living together. Very briefly, this slide is summarizing what I call the human dimension of nuclear accident. And this was almost the same in Chernobyl and Fukushima. First of all, and this is a key factor, the collapse of trust in authorities and experts. The loss of control of people over their everyday life, the disintegration of family and social ties, and the breakdown of the economic fabric in the affected areas. The apprehension about the future, particularly that of children, it's not only else, it's also what is their future? What are they going to do in this place we are living now? The threat on the autonomy and dignity of affected people, and also a deep fear to be abandoned. I think this is a very important dimension. All the testimonies I heard in Fukushima and also in Chernobyl revealed the total lack of radiological protection culture within the population. People have no clue about what is radiation. They have no experience with radiation, of course. And also, in the background, the deep footprint of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And among others, it was already mentioned during this conference, the fear of genetic effects. This is a dominant factor in the perception of the situation by the people. Why communication in such a context is really a challenge? Of course, we know there is no direct sensorial relationship with radiation, so everything passes through language. Hence, the importance of trust in the world of the others. Experts and professionals use the scientific language to communicate. They are not understood by lay people, and there are very few words in the common language to speak about radiation. It's very poor. The perception of radiation risk, as I already said, is largely dominated by the images and narratives of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as well as the Cold War. And there is the inevitable and recurring debate among experts on the effect of low levels of radiation and issues surrounding nuclear energy, and we are a good example, maintain confusions in the minds of people. As a result, this situation leaves the vast majority of people in ignorance and voiceless, and polarizes an acting minority on irreconcilable antagonistic positions. In this context, the loss of trust in the authorities and experts, combined with the lack of radiological protection culture, images of the past, and also a very important aspect, the avalanche of conflicting views of the media and experts makes conventional communication about radiation risk inoperative. It doesn't work. I just put here on the slide as a reminder the key stages of the classical risk communication. We all know that by heart. You know, get the number right, tell the public, keep publics what the number means, explain what the number means, show public they have accepted similar risk before, explain how risk benefits outweighs the cost, treat publics with respect, and so on and so on. It doesn't work. What I've learned we have learned, because I was not alone in this adventure, lessons learned. The experience shows that the most effective way of communicating the risk of radiation in a post-accident situation is to engage affected people in the characterization of their individual radiological situation in relation to their daily concerns, and to help them to interpret the results together with people in their community. You have to start from the problem of the people and try to solve this problem. This is the only way to establish a communication which is effective and going towards restoring trust. And the key factors for that is, of course, listening and understanding the concern expressed by the affected people. It's not to teach the people, it's first of all to listen and try to understand, to put yourself at their places, to try to understand why they have this position, and so on and so on. Engaging them in measurements to understand where, when, and how they are exposed, and proceeding step by step, starting from the source and progressively going to the effects. I mean, the first point is, when I say starting from the source, this is to do measurements about where the contamination is, the source of the problem. And then slowly, step by step, explain what are the pathways, and to finish by measuring doses, external dose, internal doses. Using as much as possible common language and narratives. Narratives is extremely important. Especially in Fukushima, there was the possibility to develop a narrative about Chernobyl, to talk about stories about Chernobyl. That was extremely important for the people, because this was to know that there was a past experience and that people have been successful in rehabilitating their living conditions in Belarus, where I've worked, for example. And never forgetting that risk communication only works if there is trust. I mean, this is something which is very well known. It is important for experts to keep in mind and to adopt a prudent approach for managing the risk based on the LRR principle. It's not going as low as possible. It's to try to improve the situation reasonably and to reduce exposure as low as reasonably achievable given the circumstances, which may be very different from one community to another one. To promote protective actions, improving both the well-being of individuals and the quality of the living together. Respecting the individual choices of people, because in a community you have people who have very different views, and you have to respect this view. You cannot impose one direction. To keep in mind that the issue at stake is not to make people accepting the risk, but allowing them to make informed decisions about their protection. All these lessons have led to gradually develop the process that we have called, between us, the co-expertise process, which means cooperation in expertise, to communicate effectively with people residing in the affected territories. This co-expertise process emerged in the late 90s in Belarus in the context of projects for rehabilitating the living conditions in the territories affected by the accident. And it has been enriched and refined in recent years through the experience gained in communities in Japan affected by the Fukushima accident, and particularly in Suitsegi, and you will see this experience later. The process, this co-expertise process, is fully consistent with the trust, confidence, and cooperation model, which has been developed over the last 2 decades by experts in risk perception and risk communication. All the people working around the Polsloviki is well known. You probably know, all of you knows this guy. And this is just a model, and I give here a link for those who are interested. I'm not going to develop that. So just one picture about the beginning of this co-expertise process, working with the people. And to summarize, this is something which is very similar to the LRR, what we call the LRR process, for example, in the industry. Is you all know the different steps of the LR process, to identify the problems and to identify the actions and to evaluate the possible action and so on. Here, this is a little bit similar, but to establish a dialogue, to share experience and knowledge with the local people, to engage these people in measurements, sharing results together, because this is by comparing the situation of different situations that individuals understand a lot what is at stake with radiation. Identifying self-help protective actions and organizing collective vigilance. Implementing local projects with the support of experts. All this is of course developed in parallel with the protection actions which are implemented by the authorities, like large-scale decontamination or, but you have to involve people in their own protection, in what we call the self-help protective action. This is the way to communicate. So this is a figure a scheme explaining that the co-expertise process is the basis for developing a practical radiation protection culture, allowing people to implement self-help protection actions, community projects, and also to judge the effectiveness of the protective actions which are implemented by authorities. This is just to summarize what is practical radiation protection culture. This is the knowledge and skills enabling citizens to make well-informed choices and behave wisely in situations involving potential or actual exposures to ionizing radiation. This is a definition which is under progress, under development in the development of the ICRP glossary. I think this is very important to pass the knowledge about radiation, but not as like we used to think in the past, teach people about radiation, gamma rays, X-rays, and then decay of radiation and so on. No, this is by practical things, by practical day-to-day approach based on measurements. There is a clear ethical dimensions of the co-expertise process. Experts must, I'm close to finish it. Experts must master the scientific basis of radiological protection and its practical implementation. This is accountability. To share openly all information they own, but also recognize limitations. This is transparency. To listen carefully to the stakeholders to understand their individual situation. I already mentioned that. This is empathy. To deliberate and decide together with stakeholders. This is inclusiveness. And to act in accordance with the ethics of radiological protection, that is to say prudently and equitably. And to never lose sight of the fact that what is ultimately at stake in a contaminated area after a nuclear accident is the dignity of people. Here are my concluding remarks. The experience of Chernobyl and Fukushima has shown that it is possible to communicate effectively about radiation and radiological protection with the affected people. This requires the mobilization of specific skills, adapted means of measuring radiation, and the support, of course, the support of authorities. It also takes a lot of time. The Suetsugi experience is a matter of years. It started in beginning of 2012, and people became more relaxed and get a good grip of the situation, and it was easy to communicate with them only 2 years ago. So it takes time. The key of success is to put the science and the technology at the service of resolving the concrete problem of people. And the concrete problem of people, I give an example, is my daughter is not visiting me anymore because our house is contaminated, or the surrounding of the house is contaminated. What can I do? Then you start a process of talking with this person and say, okay, maybe you should make some measurements with the help of experts to better know what's the situation. Maybe it is very contaminated and it's better than your daughter is not coming with the small baby. But if it's not contaminated, and I have very many examples of this type of situation in Belarus, then you can phone to your daughter and say, there is no reason not to come to visit us. This is how to start from the problem of the people. To ensure respect for people's freedom of choice without manipulating them in any way, but also not to abandon them on their own. I mean, this is a big fear. In Chernobyl, still more than 30 years after the accident, and this is also a fear in Fukushima. People have the fear to be abandoned by the rest of the society. So my conclusion is to work with people and not work for people, or not only for people. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, I'm going to allow one quick question, not a statement.
Well, thank you. I'll make it as quick as I can, and if you desire a question, I'll make sure there's one at the end. Thank you very much for your presentation. You actually crystallized a thought that's been rolling around my head for the last 2 days, and that is that right now we've been talking a lot about public communication, and it seems we're missing an element here, and that is the workforce communication. And I would put out to this group of individuals here that is something we should also be in consideration. And that particular point, particularly for a regulator like me with the Department of Energy that has a little more intimate day-to-day experience with the workers in the field that other organizations like the Nuclear Regulatory Commission do not have, I'm going to suggest that one of the concepts we might want to put on the table is the development of an ambassadorship with the occupational workforce that's out there to help us communicate out to the public. And I will tell you that we've been working on it a little bit here at the Hanford site with some success. But if wherever we go and we come to some conclusion, the first consideration I think we should be giving is going to the workforce out there, the hospital staffs, the Department of Energy contracting staffs, and perhaps we can even reach out to the licensee staffs, work with them to help us work with the public. I'm not a trusted individual because I'm a federal employee, but the workforce and their families around us, they are our trusted people, as you so pointed out. So my question is, does everybody agree? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment.
Okay, I think we might move on in the interest of time. So thank you very much, Jacques. It gives me great pleasure inviting our next speaker. I first heard Ms. Ryoko Ando at an ICRP meeting in 2015 in Korea, and she gave a very powerful message of how our regulations and the way that we look at accidents actually impacts on the general population. Ms. Ando represents Ethos in Fukushima, and I'd like you to welcome her today.
Yes. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ryoko Ando. I live in a city called Iwaki, which is just south of sadly famous TEPCO Fukushima, #1 nuclear power plant. Even living close to the plant, I never took interest in nuclear power plants until the accident. Neither did I know much about radiation or its effects. I was born and raised in Hiroshima until age 18. In Hiroshima, children grow up listening to stories of atomic bomb and the survivors. So I may have had more knowledge compared to my neighbors, although what I knew was very vague, like many people died from the atomic bomb, but some survivors have led healthy lives and lived into their 80s or 90s. This is not what you would call an expert knowledge. So what I know about nuclear power plants and radiation, I had to learn from scratch after March 11, 2011. It was out of necessity. My partner and I live and run a gardening business in Iwaki. So I had to know if it was safe to live in my village, which areas of Fukushima were safe, and which areas must be avoided. It's been 7.5 years since the accident. Today, we know that the radiation exposure in Fukushima was lower than initially feared. Contamination of food, including staples like rice and milk, have been successfully controlled. These are good news to be thankful for. However, all is not well. The scientific data published by international organizations and renowned journals have not erased people's concerns. I'd say that rift created by radiation remains ever deep and wide. I would like to start talking about the confusion in the Japanese society caused by the science of radiation and on the efforts to rebuild trust to repair the wide-reaching damage from the accident. The slide shows the radiation levels as of March 2011 and the evacuation zones designated by the government. By April 2017, the order was lifted from most areas except the red areas designated as difficult to return. This is how it looks today. The accident and the measures taken by the government caused huge changes and turmoil in the society. One major outcome was the loss of trust on the government and the scientists who were supposed to be authorities on the matters. It spread rapidly across all parts of society. This was caused by multiple factors. First and foremost was that a major nuclear accident actually occurred in Japan. After the Chernobyl accident, the government and the experts told us time and again that such an accident will never happen in Japan. That something which was not supposed to occur happened dealt a huge blow to their credibility. Second, the explanation went back and forth, which deepened the public doubt. Immediately after the accident, when information on the power plant was not available, the experts and the government gave overly optimistic outlook through the media. Often their statements were overturned by actual data, which proved that the accident was more serious. This further discredited the experts. Even after the initial confusion was over, the lack of consistency among the government and the experts puzzled and troubled the public. In Japan, the school year starts in April, so whether school in Fukushima should be opened became a big issue. The government set the dose standard for schools at 3.8 microsievert per hour. However, on April 29th, an expert on radiation who was advisor to the Prime Minister held a press conference and tearfully claimed he could not in good conscience accept the limit as a scholar and resigned his post. This was a huge scandal in Japan, where harmony is often prized over truth. It became a tipping point for many Japanese who were already skeptical. Many started to believe that the government, with the help of some experts, were trying to trick the people to accept their politics and measures. In April 12, the government also decided to revise the food safety standards in the wake of the accident. It issued the provisional standard values of acceptable radiation level in food, which was 500 becquerel per kilogram for most food items. The increasingly frustrated public became more and more critical of these values and called for stricter controls. The government gave into this pressure and established the new standards, that is 100 becquerel per kilogram for regular food, 50 becquerel per kilogram for milk and infant food, and 10 becquerel per kilogram for drinking water. This step reduced the number of complaints about the standards. However, it had an unintended effect to deepening the mistrust. People thought that the government lowered the limit because the provisional standards were too high and unsafe. They viewed that the change was a proof that the government had deceived the people about food safety. What is common in this is that the government or the experts changed their opinion without enough explanation to the public. Yes, the standards set in the initial days were problematic and criticized, but I would argue that changing those standards and shifting explanation rarely turns the public dissatisfaction to mistrust. Now, I would like to change the topic and talk about the activities of ATOS in Fukushima. Since 2012, we have worked together with the residents of Suetsugi district in Iwaki City, helping them study about radiation and measuring individual dose and food. Suetsugi is located 27 kilometers from the Fukushima nuclear power plant. Because of its proximity, the residents were advised to stay indoors for about 1 month until April 21, 2011. Most residents evacuated outside of the district. This year, I started interviewing the residents about those days. After the accident, our lives were flooded with information from various sources. But the residents' accounts tell a different story. In fact, they could not obtain the information they wanted. That is, information relevant to their daily lives, the data of radiation in its vicinity, and advice from people they could trust. In hindsight, our activities to measure radiation in Suetsugi was aimed at filling this information gap to provide the residents with information that were relevant to these daily lives. The radiation dose in Suetsugi and the advice from people they knew and could count on. It eventually became community-wide effort to rebuild the trust that had been lost. Now, what kind of trust was lost by the accident? First, they lost trust in the environment they lived in. Do you trust the environment you live in? This may sound strange, because the question does not come up in our daily lives. It's one of those things that you value only after it's lost. It is the foundation of our ordinary daily life, so common that we forget. Please think for a moment. Without such trust, you must constantly check the environment you live in, like an astronaut on a space shuttle. When your child wants to open a window, you want to measure the air before giving her permission. You don't think twice about using tap water to brush your teeth. The dirt your dog drags in is a nuisance, but not a health risk. We can lead an ordinary life without too much stress because we implicitly trust the safety of our environment. And this is what the accident stole from the resident. You can imagine how inconvenient and stressful it is to live in an environment such that unmeasured risk. It is impossible to remove all risks from our lives, but only when we have reasonably good estimate of the cause and the degree of possible risk can we live ordinary lives. Second, the residents lost trust in their relations with each other. I dare say that it was a blow to their trust in society itself, since human relationship is the foundation of society. The residents lost common understanding on how much they can trust the living environment, and the people developed conflicting norms of acceptable behavior, which led to discord. Such conflict happened even within families. Especially serious was the rift between the elderly and the parents of young children. The elderly tended to place high value on continuing the pre-accident lifestyle, whereas the parents prioritized minimizing the risk to their children. This often led to the breakup of multi-generation families, with only the grandparents returning to their homes. The problem the residents faced in their daily communication with families and friends cannot be measured by monitoring a device, but I believe it was the most serious problem caused by the accident. Going back to our activities, the slide lists what we worked on. They were implemented as Suetsugi District's community activities. First is external exposure management using personal dosimeter. We started taking individual measurements from 2014 to grasp the exposure level of the whole community. At times, as high as 120 residents participated in this small community. This graph shows the results from 15 participants. Each line represents his or her personal dose. The red horizontal line at the top represents annual additional external exposure of 1 millisievert. The green horizontal line at the bottom shows the natural background dose. From this graph, we can see that almost no one in Suetsugi received additional dose that was far greater than 1 millisievert. The second was measuring the internal exposure. The first community-wide whole body counting test was in July 2013. The most recent was in fall 2016. The peak participation was 120 for the WBC test as well. While the external dose reflects the person's lifestyle, the internal dose reflects his or her eating habits. In the 7 WBC test, cesium was not detected from 99% of the participants, with a detection limit of 300 becquerel per body. The third is measuring food in Suetsugi. Every Tuesday, a consultant visits the community center in Suetsugi. Any resident can bring vegetables, herbs, fruit, etc. Have these measured and discuss the result with her. So far, cesium has not been detected in most vegetables. I wonder how you view the data from Suetsugi. From the numbers, you may have felt there should not be any effects on health from this level of radiation. So I don't see any problem. Some may find it hard to understand why the residents are still concerned if no cesium was detected. Here lies the rift between the outsider and the residents, or the experts and the common folk. The problem has not been solved for the residents. It is still clear and present. And I believe that this divide holds the key to understanding the deep mistrust of the experts in the minds of many residents of Fukushima, not just in Suetsugi. It is true the level of radiation was fortunately low. Scientifically, both external and internal dose are not likely to cause health effects. However, no one can deny that the residents' lives were greatly affected by the accident. Even after massive decontamination works, the ambient level of radiation in Fukushima will remain higher than it used to be before the accident, and the residents must keep paying the price for this in their daily lives. Please look at the graph on external dose again. As I said, the green line is a natural background dose. The residents have received and will keep receiving greater external dose because of the accident. The additional dose, even if it may seem small, did not exist before. This separates them from the residents of areas that were not affected by this accident, who do not have to worry about additional dose. In the jargon of science, any foreseeable risk from the additional dose in Setsugi is considered smaller than that from smoking. CT scan results in a higher dose. Eating junk food all the time may be more hazardous than a diet rich in homegrown vegetable in Fukushima. But these explanations do not change the fact that the residents must bear the burden of an accident for which they were not responsible. Unlike medical exposure, there is no benefit from receiving the dose. Nor is the dose a result of choice like smoking or imbalanced diet. The bags of decontaminated soil piled up so high that it looks like an ominous kill is a grim reminder of the risk the residents must bear every day. In the air they breathe and from the food they eat. How can you live in such a state without a sense of unfairness? On top of that, the experts tell you there is no likely health effect, so it's not something to worry about. Or it's illogical to keep worrying when science has proved it should not affect your health. To the eyes of the experts, the effect to health may be negligible. But what if you are on the receiving end of these comments, or your parents? Doesn't it sound like you should just accept the situation, whether it is fair or not? Isn't it more rubbing it in than giving support? How can the residents trust the experts who keep repeating this mantra? The experts are not interested in the hardships they experience in every aspect of their lives. They want to invest time and effort to learn about the residents' struggles. They are only interested in promoting their message, something the residents have heard repeatedly. Such risk communication or scientific communication cannot get across because it is essentially one-way communication. What was fortunate for Setsugi was that there were few experts who did not take that road. Dr. Makoto Miyazaki of Fukushima Medical University was one of them. Jacques Rochal was another. Unlike most experts, they kept coming back to Setsugi and spent time with the residents. They look at interest in the reality of what it is to rebuild a life after the Fukushima accident. The residents' worries, the difficulties they faced, and the unanswered questions they had. After learning about the unfair situation the residents had to cope with, they utilized their knowledge to give advice based on the actual dose measurement. As a result, the residents trusted them and hold them in high regard. It is because the advice was not like a cookie cutter message, like sending a printout of the WBC result. They took the effort to know the resident in person and gave specific advice to specific problems. They helped the residents battle with the unfairness that became part of their daily lives.
Okay, I think we might leave it there for the interest of time, but I did take a chair's prerogative to actually go over time because I think it's a very important message that Ryoko has given us as regulators of these sorts of incidents. Unfortunately, we don't have any time for questions, but please help me thank Ryoko for a great talk. Okay, so our next speaker is Assistant Professor Yulia Liamzina, and she's from the Radiation Medical Science Centre of the Fukushima Medical University, and she's going to talk to us today about her work related to the social, psychological problems of the Fukushima people.
Right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to this conference. I'm very pleased to be here and address this estimated audience on the matters of risk communication and actually how to improve it. This is a short content of my talk, so I will address a little bit the importance of risk perception factors, so-called psychometric paradigm with which I'm working, and I want to propose a way how to incorporate that psychometric paradigm into risk communication, so it will be more effective, more than it is now, as we heard from Jack and Ryoko. And this paradigm is a complex issue, so I'll say a couple of words about that, and then I will show Fukushima case as I see it from my point of view, and say some couple of conclusions. So let's start. Well, you have discussed it here a little bit within last 2 days, the importance of risk communication. This is true, that it's important in accompanying any nuclear projects. We know this. But unfortunately, most risk communication efforts or campaigns currently are based only on trust and knowledge. And it's clearly not sufficient to modify perceptions of affected population. It was clearly said right now by my colleagues. So my thesis and my base for the research is that fundamental to effective risk communication is the design of accurate risk messages, which will be based on actual risk assessment, so doses as you are doing this, but also on perceived risks which affected people feel, and therefore they will be responsive to the specific fears and concerns of each demographic group within affected population. Tony has given us presentation about safety standards, and almost all safety standards do mention stakeholder engagement or stakeholder communication. However, they do not say, we do not have a document which would say how to do it actually, how to engage those stakeholders in a standard way. If a regulator wants to do it, actually he or she has to come up with that idea on her own. We do not know how to get to know your stakeholders. So this is something that we need to work more. And there are plenty of documents, communication, but then when we ask question, how to actually do it, nobody knows. So the usual approach we are taking right now, after I don't know how many accidents we had already, is that we do measure the dose, actual risk assessment, and we go straight to risk communication. And we just heard it does not work. It didn't work during Chernobyl. It didn't work during 3 Mile Island. It doesn't work in Fukushima. And we still wonder why it does not work, and nobody seems to think about why it does not work. So, but the standard way, okay, public is stupid, let's educate them. Let's educate them more, let's educate them to this. Let's produce another brochure, let's produce another leaflet. Maybe it will work. Well, I don't think it will work. And the reason it does not work is just because we do not listen, as Jack said, as Ryoko said. We actually come and tell them what we think from our perspective. We tell them what are the sieverts, millisieverts, gray, they don't care. They have their own problems, they have specific questions which they need answers for, and they do not receive those answers from that standard lectures about flights and bananas, etc. So I suggest actually to find a way how to standardize the risk perception assessment, combine it with actual risk assessment with doses and science, because this science is developed for many years, and then use it to produce risk messages which will be tailored to specific demographic groups of the affected communities, and then communicate it in a two-way communication and not one-way communication only. So why actually, maybe some of you might think, why do we need to address perceived risk? Well, because communicating actual risk by sharing only scientific results, it's necessary, yes, but it's not sufficient to respond to public concerns. And my colleagues explained it very well on real results. And understandable data in the way we are doing them now, producing reports, graph analysis, yes, this is hard science, it's necessary, but it does address intellectual needs for the information of the scientific communities. It does not address the needs of the public, especially of the affected public who live there every day in those regions. And I believe that communication needs to address also emotions. It does need to address fears and concerns and anxieties, so in other words, perceptions of affected stakeholders. So when I say actual risk, I actually mean dose and the probability of cancer or leukemia. And when I say perceived risk, this means fears, anxieties, beliefs, judgments, also cultural differences, and also different values of the people. Many scientists think it's not a science, or they are simply scared of this because this means feelings. And for many of the scientists, it's actually non-quantifiable, so it's hard to calculate. So this means it's better not to talk about it at all. Let's pretend it does not exist. Well, when we do pretend it doesn't exist, it does not work then. And actually, the studies of actual versus perceived risks are very well established, very well weighted. Yes, they are old because they were one of the people who started doing this was Paul Slovic and Baruch Fischhoff and Sarah Lichtenstein. This was back in last century, 1970s, 80s. Unfortunately, currently, regardless of a huge amount of data and experience with this kind of studies, nobody seems to try to incorporate it into public communication efforts. So that effort of taking into account perceived risk for public communications in existing exposure situations, not emergency, is still in its infancy, I would say. So risk perception factors, so-called psychometric paradigm, is a complex issue. These are not all of the factors. This is just example of 12. There are 18 of them. So when somebody says, "Oh, it's only about trust," no, actually, it's not only about trust. It's about many other things. But those things might be slightly different for each of us, depending on our priorities and depending on our family situation at the moment. So, for example, when my colleagues did the dialogue and sat down with people and addressed and listened to them, they did address some of the factors like familiarity, like understanding, like uncertainty. So the dread went down, and therefore personal stake improved and trust improved. That is why it worked. And that's what I'm trying to do, to look at the complexity of the situation in Fukushima now. and see how those factors relate to each other and how they correlate to each other. But also, when I'm doing my research, I did ask myself some additional issues to consider, which are very important, I think, because we as a scientists need to know actually which particular factors do exist for the particular affected community. Not all of them will exist. It might be 6 factors or 8 factors. We need to know the priority. We need to know the correlation as well. So we actually can develop the strategy. We actually can develop risk messages which will be tailored to those specific concerns and need, and not just keep telling them, well, eat 3 bananas and you will be fine. One of the issues I want to work with is actually, I believe that this kind of thing should be incorporated into regulatory documents and hopefully safety standards one day, because this is important. And generally, when an accident happens, especially nuclear accident does happen, this bring multiple consequences. This is not just cancer and doses, not at all. This is fear of health effects, of course, but it's also, as we heard, distrust in authorities and distrust in experts. It's actually a social stigma, but not only for people who stayed or who were evacuated. There's also social stigma for the entire country when tourists don't want to come anymore because it is contaminated and they're afraid. And one of the issues which is widely ignored are psychological consequences, mental health consequences, which I will show you in a while. And this is an issue which I feel sorry that it's ignored, because like we have a Fukushima Health Management Survey and 8 years of data now which do prove that social, psychological consequences and mental health issues are the most severe issues of the Fukushima nuclear accident. It's not the dose or the cancer rates. And psychological consequences, these are not just stress, this is anxiety, and this is consequent post-traumatic stress disorder. This usually leads to excessive abuse of alcohol or some other substances. This leads to obesity, this leads to cancers, and this does affect next generations as well, because as there was a saying in my house, when mother is not happy, nobody is happy around. So at the moment there are a lot of unhappy mothers, and most of them were pregnant at the time of the accident, so they did suffer from severe stress. And now we see the behavior disorders among children who just started going to school. And our psychologists do link it to the high amount of stress and anxiety which mother suffered from the time of the accident, actually. And it's important to remember, and this is from Chernobyl accident still, that after accidents which involve radiation, questions, concerns, and fears start very early. They actually start immediately as person learns about it, but then the emotional toll of the accident goes on for many, many years ahead. So Fukushima case, there was not just a nuclear accident, it was a triple disaster. So it was an unfortunate combination of the natural and man-made events. And these are the comments which we do have from the Fukushima residents at the moment. People do feel scared still, this is true. People do feel abandoned. People notice that Fukushima almost does not receive attention any longer in the news. I did ask my colleagues in Europe and here if you see anything in the news, and nowadays they say no. So probably there will be one article when there will be an anniversary, but that's pretty much it. But for those residents who are there every day fighting with unknown and with radiation, it's very stressful environment to live. And Fukushima has massive amount of monitoring data. I think we have most of the data on the world now from multiple sources, NGOs and government and everything. But still, I believe that it does not help to effectively improve public acceptance. And it does not help people to better understand what is at stake, as Jack and Ryoko have showed. So why is that? And this is like a more small homework for you. This is, for example, current situation in one of the districts. Okay, I don't know how it works. What is this? Oh, okay. So just imagine yourself living in one of the houses, and this near the house is a low radioactive waste. So which factors do you think you would have personally if you would be the owner of the house and you would go to the work every day passing by it? It stands already for 8 years. Nobody actually knows how safe it is, how low it is, or it's not low. And nobody knows when it will be removed. And this does create a lot of psychological problems because then mothers do not allow children to go and play outside, for example. Or another, the big picture over there is a playground and football field. So children don't have where to play now, so they must stay at home and do what? Watch TV or play video games. As a result, we see the increase of obesity among children. Right, and then consequent maybe diabetes and cancer from that as an indirect effect health of the accident. Another situation, this were floods 2 years ago in Japan, and this was widely in the news. So how do you think people who are living there, seeing this in the news, felt? And which of the factors they did experience when the bags of waste were washed away? Some of them were never found. So just think about it for a minute for yourself. And then we do have proofs, scientific proofs calculated that many people are still worried. And they do worry about external exposure, internal exposure. They know it very well now. By now, it's 8.5 years. And I was in the Ivaki conference 1 month ago, and the mayor told me, you know what, our women are afraid to drink tap water. So despite of all that knowledge and numbers and data, they are asking simple question. Can we actually drink tap water? What to do with that? There is a clear gap between reality, between scientists saying it's safe, it's okay, like here tons of Excel tables showing it's safe. Why are you worried about? And then there is clear gap between public and their perceptions who do not perceive it safe. And decision makers and politicians do not know what to do with that. So this is why I believe that, it is all because we do not address perceptions of the affected public. We do have a lot of psychological distress, and our university is doing a lot of research on that, our mental health department. I like this slide very much because I think it clears very clear shows what is going on actually in terms of perceptions. For the whole world, it's actually the whole Japan is contaminated. You guys most probably even don't know where Fukushima is located on the map. But for people of Fukushima, they think it's only them, that tiny bit that is affected, and they are abandoned, right? What's important to take into account, and also to work with the people outside the prefecture, so they would know more and would be concerned less. This is our main report and our main job to do, mental health and lifestyle survey. It's publicly available from the website. If anybody interests, let me know. And it's in English, a very rare case, but it is in English. So we do have detailed surveys as well as a basic survey, and one of them is mental health and lifestyle survey, which does address 2 risk perceptions out of 18. So current challenges which we are still facing, and it's almost the end. Technical challenges, of course, of decommissioning of the nuclear reactor. Site selection for the final disposal, it has not started yet. Reducing the volume of waste, well, there are about 22 million of that black plastic bags you have seen. And according to the Ministry of Environment, it will take another 30 to 40 years to complete the waste issue. Remaining evacuees, well, here we are talking about around 58,000 people remaining in temporary houses. Who doesn't know what will be happening with them. Perceptions of radiation risk, Ryoko explained it very well. Health problems, not just thyroid, no, not just cancers, mainly mental health issues, And as a result also now of the stigma, bullying at schools. And because children do not want to accept those evacuees and saying, we don't want you here, your radioactive bug just go away. So evacuees have to hide their identities and pretend they are not from Fukushima. And this is very hard on psychological consequences for them. There were suicides among youth and adults because of the bullying, but this is not almost not discussed, unfortunately. Stress and post-traumatic stress disorder, well, this is a responsibility of my department, and because it does affect all aspects of life: substance abuse, obesity, cancer, divorces, all that thanks to stress and PTSD. So, in a conclusion, I think we need the holistic approach to the measures which will mitigate the overall health risks, not just those and cancer, for the nuclear accidents. When we are dealing with the nuclear accidents, I hope mental health and psychological issues and social issues will be included in regulatory documents. And I believe that this proposed new proposed approach will be a unique opportunity to support local population affected by existing exposure situations, and it will provide them with a sense of the ownership. Again, so there's a takeaway message. We need to understand how different people and different demographics perceive risk in order to tailor risk communication to improve it actually, and regain trust in control of daily life and of the authorities and experts. And my favorite teacher has said a long time ago that risk management should be a two-way street. So just as public should take experts' account into experts' assessment into account, so should experts respect various factors from cultural to emotional that will result in the public's perception of risk. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Yulia. Great talk. In the interest of time, we're not going to have any questions. It's also in the interest of my safety because I have Sharon at the back waving cards at me. So no, Rod, this one is for coffee. Sorry. Otherwise, I'm going to be in trouble. So our next speaker is Professor Otsura Niwa, and he's the chairman of the Radiation Effects Research Foundation, and he's been chair since 2015. So please welcome Professor Niwa.
So I hope that I can finish my talk in 10 minutes so that we can have enough time during this discussion session, and most of what I wanted to say being already said. So I'll be just going through the key, and I skip this. Everybody knows skip this, and this is a kind of dose at the early time of the accident. And I was trained in radiation biology, and I knew some important data coming from RERF for many years. And so I thought, well, yeah, it's about time for me to go to Fukushima to give a lecture or whatever, and can just tell the people that you don't have to worry too much about this kind of dose. And just like, Ryoko was saying, stupid researcher comes and start to talk about, and I failed completely, definitely. It was horrible because 200 audience, and I'm just talking about LNT or whatever it is, and they're just very quiet, and some cold air oozing up to me. And I'm just lost, and I couldn't figure out why this is so. And I'm telling the truth, and I have good knowledge of this, radiation risk and everything. Didn't work. Why? And I've been just asking this, and then I was at that time I was a main commission member of ICRP, and so we discussed with Jack, and Jack said, we did so-called some kind of risk communication or dialogue things in Belarus. It worked. So I was skeptical, and how can this situation be treated in such a thing. But we made a journey, maybe 10 weeks journey to Belarus, southern part, visited there. And people are just doing things okay. And it was Friday when we arrived in a small hotel in a local town, very close to the kind of limited zone or just 30-kilometer evacuation zone. And then it was Friday night, and we had a dinner in a very shabby restaurant. And then the lady of the restaurant came to us and, is it okay to play music? And I don't know, but young, maybe high school student with nice tie and everything, and nice girls with evening dress kind of thing. Maybe 10, 20 of them just came in and ate something and then start dancing with music. And I felt, after 25 years, and this trip was 2011. And so after 25 years of the big accident, now younger generations are just dancing in this shabby restaurant with music. And I was very happy, so I believed what he said. So we started doing dialogue, and these dialogue things, which from which I learned a lot. And I'll be just telling you what I learned, and only maybe 2-3 slides I can just go through. And so dialogue thing, then this is a way I see your life, everyday life. You are the center or whatever, and you are the leader of your own life. You control most of the element in your life. Friends, working place, environment, or whatever, house and nice family and blah, blah, blah. And you have full control, you believe, that you can enjoy your easy, nice, and happy life. And what happens when radiation comes in? That's it. So everything, every line you have with your family members or your friends, environment suddenly changes. The relation is completely damaged, definitely. So your life is not your life anymore. Ryoko was saying that, maybe married couple, they have some conflict about how do you think about, this radiation? Then wife say, no, well, for the benefit of our children, we have to evacuate. The husband say, maybe I have this work be done in this place. And then wife and kids just go to other prefecture, get away from the Fukushima. Then poor father is just staying in a working place and just earning money. And so if these couple are in a good relation, it's okay, they can endure. But if there is any small crack, which you cannot even detect in a daily life, but crack may just get bigger and bigger and bigger if they are separated. So all of your relations, the crack become much bigger. And then you have all kinds of things. And then the worst thing to come, actually this came to many people, I'm sure. One thing is you cannot control your life anymore. Your daily life is dominated by radiation. So what happens? If you lose your control over your own life, you get depressed. And I can clearly see, because I had 3 years horrible depression myself. And I got away, and then I learned depression is something, well, some crazy people sometimes get, not me, But depression can be coming to anybody, anytime, and as long as you get lost in controlling your situation. So people lost control of the situation in Fukushima because something like radiation, which they cannot do anything, comes in, and they become, suddenly radiation becomes the master of your life. So this is a kind of situation. So what to do? What to do is like, I think Ryoko said, and many people said, dose measurement. And, you know, radiation biologists did very poorly when handling Fukushima. But one kind of researchers who handled Fukushima very well was dosimetry people. They come and they teach people how to do dosimetry and dose. And the dose can be shared by anybody. Those can be shared by the citizen of Tokyo or Fukushima or anywhere in the world. And some of the things, this is I just skip it. And Fukushima High School boys did a very interesting activities. And they carried D-shuttle, which Ryoko's slide was showing. And they measured 2 weeks dose. And this 2 weeks dose was converted into your yearly dose. And then this is outside of Fukushima. Oops. Yeah. And inside of Fukushima, a few schools and Europe. Then this is the average. And within Japan, Fukushima is not that high at all. And in France, you have the highest high school. And that's Corsica Island. That's a chunk of granite pushed up by the African continent. And so they have high background. So Fukushima High School kids just get confidence. Okay, this place is okay. And giving confidence, dosimetry somehow did very well. And we biologists did very badly, by the way. That's very unfortunate. But one other thing I'd like to share with you is this. You know, there is very intrinsic gap between science and humanity, or science and people. We are one of the people. And my own existence and science has big, big gap. One is science, science seeks for generic rule, while public relies on individual rule. Then science relies on objective approaches, while public relies on subjective judgments, definitely. Then, science handle risk. Oh, there is some mistake in it. But, science handle risk in proportion, percentage. But public or individual takes risk as all or none. There is a big gap. So 1% increase, 5% increase we talk. That no message to you or myself. Once I get cancer, I get cancer. So it's a big, big gap. So in 21st century, we are much more aware of like informed consent system, and we are trying to merge science and humanity that way. And we cannot ignore this non-science part. So in this century, we are trying to fuse these two things to come up with better things. So Fukushima is part of it. And I'm now working at RERF, and I have to deal with survivors and the event which occurs more than 70 years ago, and how to deal with it. And that is a kind of thing I've been put up with right now. And I try to work very hard to do something on this. So, but Fukushima, being in Fukushima taught me that I have to be probably taking this kind of action. Thank you very much.
Okay, Rod, I know you've been standing there for a long time.
Okay, the question I really wanted to ask and have people hear is, does a conservative approach to radiation risk models thus make people crazy? In other words, if we're taking conservative risk, we are, by definition, slightly exaggerating the risk and slightly exaggerating what we're telling people is going to happen to them. Does that exaggeration contribute to all of the mental health issues that you're talking about? And, oh, by the way, I agree with you, Doctor. There's nothing worse than being depressed.
Yeah.
From personal
truly,
experience.
May I? Yeah, sure. Yeah, you know, this LNT discussion I've been listening for now 3 days has one thing quite wrong. LNT is usually coupled with relative risk. And relative risk goes from 0 to infinity. And we use so-called LNT as a tool to tell the people if the dose is low, risk is low. If the dose is 0, risk is 0. If the dose is high, you have to worry about. So it's a kind of measures we use to worry about or not to worry about. If the risk, you know, between prefectures in Japan, Aomori Prefecture has highest cancer death. And Nagano Prefecture back in Japan has lowest death rate. And the death rate differs by a factor of 0.1, 10% differences. And people are happy living in Aomori. And we are talking about, you know, relative risk of 0.05 or 0. Something. Do you have to worry about? Do you tell the public you have to worry about? That is something we have to do. No, risk is something to be probably said all or none. But you guys are telling all or none. There is no safe dose, but safe is human judgment. Why do you keep saying there is no safe dose? As long as you're using LNT, you have to be more, you know, honest about this concept of LNT and relative risk. If you're a scientist, don't use this, no, there is no, you know, safe dose. That's activist. They have their own agenda.
I think,
not mine.
I think that's actually a pretty good point to stop, because I think that's pretty much right on point. So we might take a break for coffee. If everyone can be back here at 10:30, and can please,
I need to point out something that most people in this room are unaware of. That is that unlike U.S. and other countries' statutory siting requirements for perceived high-risk facilities, in Japan, the normal practice is for the utility and the government to pay money to the local governmental units like villages and what have you. So,
yep. No worries. Thank you for your comment. Can I just ask everybody, thank our four speakers for some very enlightening talks. Thank you.